Hello everyone, and welcome to the second part of this UniFrance series looking at new realities for film. The first session took place a week ago, and it was with distributors and salespeople on the whole. And what we were looking at and talking about was how some of the changes that we'd introduced, some of the ideas that had been introduced during the lockdown, had become realities that may become new realities when we finally get to go back. I think what the theme was that came up very strongly from the last session was that decisions taken during the last few months were more opportunistic than strategic. What we learned as a film industry, I think, was quite often that we were capable of switching direction at a speed which perhaps we weren't given enough credit for before. But there's still some thinking that, what happens when you have a captive audience, and not just when the cinemas aren't open, but also when there's no sport, when there's no shopping, when there's no restaurants. It's obviously not an entirely real situation. So what happened afterwards, I think, becomes very interesting. But we talked a lot about how the trends that we've seen during lockdown were really accentuations and accelerations of preceding themes and ideas within the industry. So this second one, we're going to try and get a bit more concrete, and we're going to try and talk about some of those models. How do we turn some of those trends into things which are sustainable and viable as economic business models, or models and structures which can support the kind of diversity that we want to see. A term I think we'll be using a lot during this session is an ecosystem. What happens when we emerge into this big wide world? Is there going to be different sets of relationships along the value chain of film, perhaps between some of the digital changes we've seen and what's already happening in cinema? And I think it's very important that we don't fall into the trap of thinking there is the digital world and there's the real world. The ecosystem and the way that audiences behave is quite clearly one that embraces both the experience economy and a lot of those convenience and choices that have been made available by what we've seen from VOD and so on. So what we've got is a panel, I think, who have been very much using this period to explore. If we start the bottom right there, we have Richard Lorber of Kino Lorber. I think it's perhaps one of the stars, I would argue, of this last few months. I think pioneering the ideas of virtual cinema, working with cinemas. The Kino Marquee site's been particularly impressive. But Richard is himself, I think, a serial innovator, someone who's been thinking and working on these things for some time. Andrea Occhipinti, a very familiar figure, again, to lots of us. Lucky Red, one of our most important distributors. During this period, launched the Mio Cinema site, which again worked closely with cinemas on that project. Someone who I think has long embraced the opportunities that he sees to work in perhaps a more sensible relationship between cinema and the kind of emerging online market. Sometimes controversial as far as some of your colleagues in distribution are concerned, but one that I think has opened up a lot of conversation that we're going to be having much more seriously after the lockdown. Louisa Dent, MD of Artificial Eye Curzon. Curzon, again, have been pioneering in many, many ways, but Curzon Cinemas and Artificial Eye came out of a situation in the UK that was relatively static. It not only pioneered that Curzon home cinema approach, but it also had a big cinema expansion. And I think it's quite important to remember that. It went out into far beyond its traditional strongholds in London to open up cinemas all over the UK. Radu Mihiliano, who's a very familiar figure, I think, again, as president of the ARP, but also one of, I think, our best loved filmmakers. I think The Source, Le Concert, Trahir, these are films that I think have been very keen to take on big themes. And I think one of the things that I hope Radu's going to talk about is how the new normal actually needs to be thought about more broadly than just the narrow technical side of it. We need to be thinking about what we can do in this period that maybe can move things forward from where we were, rather than simply battening down the hatches to try and stop huge problems. So, and Ariane Giroud-Dallaire, MK2 set up the Canadian business, MK2 Mile End, and I think what that aim of that project, I think, was to try and cement international partnerships. But again, it's one that I think started out with the idea explicitly of building an ecosystem that would build an international partnerships and be able to take film beyond the narrow borders, both demographically and geographically. And it too set up a VOD site during this period that, again, we'll no doubt hear how those things developed. So that's the panel. Richard, maybe we could start with you. Kino Lob, you know, one of the things that I think you did at the start, well, let's start with you just explaining. Tell us how you approached this lockdown and what changed. What did you already got in place, and what did you push forward immediately during this period?
Okay, well, you know, we were at the top of our game, so to speak, in early February, about to release some of what we perceived to be the strongest titles of our theatrical lineup. And we had some significant success with the first weekend and days of the release of Bacurau, Kleber Mendoza's jury prize winning film from last Cannes. And then suddenly the theater shut down, and the epidemic, you know, was on our faces. And we gathered together. My team is very, very creative and improvisational and innovative, and we tried to come up with some solutions so that we can sustain our business on that and other films that we had lined up. And we were benefiting from the fact that some months earlier we had decided to launch our own VOD platform, but specifically not subscription VOD. We decided to avoid the fray and what I consider to be a fool's errand of just joining the hundreds of other small micro SVODs. We launched the transactional VOD, positioning it, in my own idea, as kind of art house iTunes. We have a very large library of over 2,000 titles for digital availability. And so we built that platform and realized that we could repurpose it to deliver a cinema version of the films that we were releasing theatrically in digital format to our customers. The goal was to empower the theaters to assume the curatorship of offering the films that they would have played in their physical theaters to virtual audiences who would buy tickets on their site based on the recommendations of the theaters. This kicked off, we built the platform called Kino Marquee on the backbone of Kino Now, literally in 7 days, from March 12th to March 19th. And on March 19th, we relaunched Bacurau on 11 screens, including film at Lincoln Center and a couple of other notable partners that we've worked with over the years, all of whom had committed to taking the film in physical terms. By the end of the weekend, we had over 60 theaters, and by the end of the first week and a half, we had 150 theaters, and eventually we had over 250 theaters, approaching 300, that were clamoring to have this particular film on virtual screens served to their homebound customers. The key to the success of this was the ability of the theaters to message effectively to their constituencies, to basically activate their base and engage their customers in buying a virtual ticket. We established pricing of $12. I believe we were the first in the market. Maybe Oscilloscope was doing it at about the same time. But the price point held, and we then started putting other films that we had in some stage of release. Our film Beanpole, which won the director's directing prize in Cannes for Kantemir Balagov, had already started its run, and there was demand for that. We continued with several other key films. It wasn't until we decided to go out with our documentary, Hilma af Klint, Beyond the Visible, that we took what we considered a frightening but courageous step to launch a film in virtual theatrical release. a film that had not previously been booked in physical terms. And we followed that very quickly with the documentary Capital in the 21st Century. The success we had with all of these films confirmed to us that there was an appetite for viewers to basically, one, support their local theaters on the presumption that 50% of the ticket price would go to paying the theaters back and support them when they were shuttered and had no other forms of income. I kind of humorously dubbed it filmanthropy, but that became a rallying cry for audiences to basically continue to support the theaters even if they couldn't go there physically. We've since, 2 months into this, we've since added now over a dozen films, mostly our own, but we've begun to take on films from other distributors who have an alignment with our curation and our sensibilities. The first film was from Good Deed Entertainment, the company that released the Vincent van Gogh painted animated film a few years ago. It was called Extraordinary. We've since launched with another film with them, and we're about to launch a film with Wellgo called The Hummingbird. What is the title exactly? But the fact is that the audiences now are coming to terms with a wider array of choices, as other distributors have also added films to the process. And theaters themselves have built their own platforms so that they can be the ingestion point for these cinema experiences. The bottom line is that there was an ongoing paradigm shift in the marketplace from physical and theatrical attendance more toward virtual screenings, digital at-home viewing. The pandemic forced this paradigm shift to become a paradigm shove, if you will. It accelerated the transition. And the question is, what will the business look like at the end of the process? We are cinema forward. We're a very theatrically oriented company. Our tagline under our logo is experience cinema. We're rooting for the cinemas to come back, but at the same time, we're realistic about the challenges they'll face, certainly for the foreseeable future, when a sold out show means a half full auditorium.
But that's the key, Richard, to me. I mean, what you've done is really taken hold of the opportunity there, or the necessity. It became that mother of invention. You did amazing things when you were there. It's the model, the model that comes out of it isn't a replacement, VOD replacing cinema. You really have opened up the potential, the idea of this collaborative, cooperative ecosystem in which cinemas would have all the benefits of the experience economy, but it would also have this secondary factor that a new window, if you like. But is that what's your evidence so far, or your gut on whether that's a genuine model?
Right now, we're calling it our duplex releasing strategy, which will involve both physical release bookings complemented by virtual screens. There's a lot of concern about this from a number of points of view. Some of the theaters are particularly concerned with virtual screenings about geo-blocking, so that if they're presenting a film in virtual terms, they don't want that film to be available in other markets at different price points, possibly. The physical experience is one that we think probably should precede the virtual experience. So we're also talking about windows, whether we make a duplex model available simultaneously, physically in the theater and digitally available, or whether the digital should be more of a holdover event after the physical theatrical launch. But the reality is that theater income is going to be severely impacted for the foreseeable future based on social distancing and sanitizing. The theaters are going to need supplemental income. There's been a tradition of anxiety, if not paranoia, among theaters about this digital Trojan horse, about converting audiences into stay-at-home couch viewers of Netflix and other digital services. We see the virtual cinema experience as a way of reversing the Trojan horse, of giving the theaters now a way to capture revenue stream that otherwise might be going into the pockets of the big giant SVODs. I see the theaters as the new curators of their own, if you will, micro SVOD services down the road. But in the near term, we think we have to protect the theatrical experience. We have to give it priority and allow the theaters to decide whether they want to make the virtual available simultaneously or after with a delay in this duplex model.
And quickly, do you see any, from your immediate experiences, do you see any appetite, a changing appetite amongst those exhibitors to try this out, given the economics that they're going to come into?
We absolutely do. And, the different theaters have different experiences, but they're all pretty realistic. They're survivors. The art houses are very innovative in themselves. But in the past 2 months, we've sold about almost $600,000 worth of virtual tickets across our little gems, our art house beauties. And it's paralleling what kind of business we'd be doing in physical terms, and the theaters are getting paid about half of that right now. So they're seeing the real results, and we're happy to share the information. We've been making it pretty public. There's an opportunity here. It's not going to be the same as physical, but it's going to be a meaningful supplement.
Okay, there's supplemental rather than replacement. Louisa, maybe we could come to you. Curzon has been working on models that I think try to do some of these things already. I mean, it has been. I heard a distinction gets made quite often between in the VOD world between people who are obsessed by products and people who are obsessed by audiences. And it seems to me that Curzon would see itself as an audience-driven organization that you'd be looking for those things that audiences have shown an appetite for, and then try to be as flexible as possible. But is anything changed that makes that model more likely during this period?
I think Curzon has been doing the two, releasing in cinemas and on Curzon Home Cinema for a number of years. I think first and foremost, we're a lover of film, and we don't see the fact of going to the cinema as one thing, and the audiences want to go to the cinema and have that community, but some people don't want to go, can't go. And we want to give them that opportunity to see the films, to see these great films at the same time as the press and all the publicity is coming out, so that they can watch it on Curzon Home Cinema. So what I think we felt all along is that the two audiences, they don't cannibalize each other. The people who choose to go to the cinema to see them can always go, and the people who want to see them at home can. We've never felt that by going day and date on Curzon Home Cinema, we've lost out in our cinemas for audiences. We released a few years back Cold War, day and date at the end of the summer, and it remained in the cinemas for 17 weeks, and it was on Curzon Home Cinema as well. So I think and it grossed £1 million, 1.1 million pounds at the box office. So I don't think we feel that the home cinema is eating into our audiences. It's giving the audience the opportunity to choose how they want to see it. That's always been our policy.
But would you say, I mean, the argument is quite often against Curzon is that it's atypical. You own the cinemas, you own the VOD platform.
Yeah.
If you didn't, is that model something which works, just as a model for the rest of the industry?
It's more complicated because obviously we're looking out towards the audiences all the time. So you've got the community and you've got the audience who goes into the cinema, who knows the brand and who can then come to the Curzon Home Cinema because they know the Curzon brand and they trust us. They trust that it's curated, and the same thing, that the cinemas are curated, highly curated, and our audiences trust that curation. And the platform is also very curated. So you're not just going on to one of these large platforms and not being able to find anything. You have 2 or 3 new films. During lockdown, we've been having 2 or 3 new films, premium films a week. we've had new things coming on, but it's always curated. And I think that's the thing, our audiences can trust that.
But that's a model again for you. Curzon has built a brand, very deliberately built a brand around that idea of curation and quality, and the cinemas that go with it very much fit that kind of approach. But does that, beyond that, if, you know, for individual distributors working in other territories, I can see why they might say, well, that's not a model for the industry, that's a model for Curzon that maybe works very well in the UK. But is it something, that kind of flexibility, that you think can be a model for the whole industry?
I think, well, I mean, I think you can see, as Richard has said, as Andrea will come on and explain, that I think there's a model for certain types of films as well. And I think this is what lockdown I'm finding very interesting, is that we're experimenting with a new way of distributing, of joining up partnerships with sales agents and distributing it in a different way. For certain films, the UK has been a difficult territory for specialist art house films. I mean, obviously not for films like Parasite or Portrait of a Lady on Fire, but some of these wonderful smaller films where the costs of releasing are so high, the cinemas you're in for a weekend and then on the Monday you're out, the rentals are very low. So what's been interesting during this period is some of these films that perhaps we wouldn't have taken the risk of doing a theatrical with the cost implied, that we've been doing it straight onto the virtual, onto the Curzon Home Cinema, on a much lower P&A, and it's attracting audiences. Audiences are hungry to see these films. The question, of course, is what will happen afterwards, what will happen after lockdown has finished. But I think that is a model that can be taken elsewhere, depending, each territory is very different. But I think platforms, and there are a lot of them, and there are a lot of different ones which are curated, movies in other territories, they have their own system. I think it does work. I think people are hungry to see good films, and they don't necessarily have the ability to go out and see them, or the distributors can't release them in the cinema.
Yeah, I think the question was very quickly was that the argument there, I get Curzon's model. I mean, it's one that's completely understandable, and I understand that some people will see films on the small screen that they won't see on the big screen. But if we're looking for this diverse film culture, this big ecosystem coming in, that's not necessarily a model for those smaller films. I mean, the money that they're getting...
They can join up with cinemas, they can do the same thing as Richard's doing, or find different ways, or Andrea setting up different ways of working with cinemas, that they can do that as well. Or I think a lot of people are also, a lot of distributors who own cinemas will also have been discussing with us about doing the same sort of system occurs in other territories. A similar platform, and we may, you know, that's another thing of expanding into other territories.
Okay, and Andrea, you were mentioned there. I mean, I think you set up Mio Cinema. When I look at Louisa's model, which seems to me something that's actually very well established. I mean, it's been in the UK now for some time, and it's you know, it proves its point, I guess, in still carrying on that strategy. It's a proper strategy year after year. For you, you've come in and set up Mio Cinema again. It feels like it's something which was necessary during this period. But are you looking across at your Curzons or similar setups and thinking this is a model that we come out of this lockdown into an exciting new future where you as Lucky Red may be involved in a completely different approach, a completely different brand?
Obviously, we have been looking around of what other players were doing. First of all, we are all theatrically driven distributors. So this is our main interest and business now. Obviously, the production, but you know, we are interested in the theatrical distribution. We're thinking to do a VOD platform, but with you know, all this platform around, we were kind of leaving the idea. on the side, but we control a theaters chain, art house theater chain called Circuito Cinema, along with other distributors, Beam, Distribuzione, and so on. We distribute in theaters that are controlled directly, and some other theaters are just programmed. One of our frustration was that some theaters are doing very well, and some theater, even if they are in a great city, in an excellent location, were doing very badly. So one of our project was to do kind of a marketing, to put up a marketing team to help out these theaters to do a better promotion with their local audience. Okay, so we had this project. And as soon as the lockdown came out, we combined the two things, because at the beginning, you know, the idea to speak with the theaters directly, we have approached them. They were very jealous of their data, of their newsletters, of their, you know, of all the information they have. So with this situation and with the fact that we were going to release directly films that were going to be released, like Les Miserables, After the Wedding, the Dolan, a new Dolan film, and so on, were interesting to them. The system is very similar to, you know, the one that Richard mentioned. We're giving them 40% of the vision that is sold, and they are involved in the promotion. So it's very important, their role locally. What we have noticed is that some theaters do the same way, do great, some they're very flat. And because they don't have, they are not very active. And what we're doing and what we plan to do is to kind of put our team and to create a team to help them out. And the idea is that once we go back to theatrical distribution, to normal, back to normal, that release will be possible, we'll still kind of help them out to do better, you know, be better in touch, inform better their customers. And in the same time, now the films are just in the platform, but by an economic point of view, I want to be clear, this is not sustainable. You know, these films that we made available for this VOD system, we previously sold them to a pay TV, Sky, with which we have an output deal. So, I mean, alone the VOD business in Italy is very poor. It was poor. It's gone up obviously during this time, but it's not. It doesn't at all substitute or can be an alternative to the theatrical release or to any other kind of solution. I mean, we need to have a proper pay TV. But what I mean is that we probably will buy films directly for the platform, and other films will go on the platform after the proper window, because we cannot do day and date in Italy. We've been burned out when we did a film with day and date with Netflix, and we have become the bad guys. So since we want to be distributors and be on the market, we cannot do that.
But Andreas, has any of that changed? I mean, the culture, the anger when we were in Cannes booing at Netflix screening. I always think booing in cinemas is a particularly odd thing to do, but when we were in that stage, that was way before the lockdown. Do you think anything's changed in the way that exhibitors or even audiences are thinking about that relationship between cinema and VOD now?
I mean, in this particular case, they are seeing it as a possible. They think they need to have something like that. They need, if they want to, especially if they want to attract a younger audience, they need to have this kind of digital extension to the theater. A theater with no service on the side probably sound old and less appealing. So they are more keen on being part of it. In the same time, I think there will be more kind of nuances in terms of windowing for smaller films, or for films that are released under a certain number of prints. They will have probably a more flexible release and can go out on the services before. But still, I mean, it's still a big problem, the fact that the platform are a competition for the physical theatrical release. You know, many of the films that were supposed to go theatrically have gone to the platform, and some are not available at all. Yes, they're available on VOD, but for the main chains, they're not available, and they fear very much that. one of the main issues has been, for instance, for Italian films, since the American films has been postponed and the Italian films, especially comedy, have become very precious. All the exhibitors were looking very carefully to who was selling those films to platform and kind of, you know, taking them out from the theatrical competitive.
But I think the world, having read your comments previously, and obviously we've spoken over the years, it feels to me like the system that all of you have been speaking to so far is absolutely not about replacement. It's absolutely trying to find this ecosystem in which the strengths of cinema can fit alongside. But what you're calling for is complete flexibility, or a large degree of flexibility. And those models, we had a Q&A question just come through on this, that the models at the moment feel like they're strict. You know, we've got to have a distinct limit all the time. Why can't we have a more flexible and open system which allows cinema release and this VOD release to work? What's stopping that at the moment?
I think there will be more flexibility, but I think we also have learned that the theatrical release is very, very important, and it needs a proper window to protect it. I think depends from what is the scope of the film. What kind of film are we talking about? If we're talking about, you know, films that have a chance and are worth it to spend money to promote them and should make money on the theaters, they have to have a proper window, probably shorter than the one we have now, and because the one we have now in Italy is 105 days, it's very long. But and then there should be flexibility for smaller films. So I think we should find a way, and probably I hope we will find a kind of a more realistic way of also offering these films to the audience, because sometimes we forget about that.
Okay, so I mean, what we've heard so far, I mean, we've got two models, I think, in the Kino Lorber and Kurz models. Well, we've got brands that have grown up out of this, and I think a lot of credit has to go to organizations and companies that have actually managed to build brands that people trust and they go back to and they want to go back to. And to that extent, flexibility is driven by audiences. I mean, the audience decides whether they want to go to those brands or not. The problem is that we're not really audience driven, have never been really audience driven outside of this. I mean, our structures are ones that have been there for a long time. And it feels to me like the problem we have in Europe is still in trying to build a model that there's a lot of vested interest there still, understandable vested interests, but those vested interests mean that there is no audience driven model. We decide what we want as a business model. We as a business are trying to compromise between different parts of the value chain. I mean, I've been devil's advocate here, but is that not the problem, that the industry is trying to dictate, or government is trying to dictate, someone is trying to dictate, but the audience desire is not at the heart of our strategy?
Absolutely. Sorry.
To who was the question?
I'm saying again, it's our problem that we're not audience driven. We are driven by our internal dynamic of a value chain that's working the same way for years and years.
Yeah, but go ahead. I mean, I've spoken enough.
Hold on one second, Radu. I'm going to come to you in 1 second. I'll just let Andrea answer that question. I'm going to come to Radu and then to Louisa.
Yeah, I think that, listen, if we look up with the film that we were supposed to release, Les Miserables and so on, what the results, the economic results of the VOD, of the TVOD that we have had in Italy is not even comparable to what could have been the theatrical release. So I think this is not an alternative. If we give to the audience everything in the same moment, because the audience wants wherever they want in every moment, they want to be free to see that movie whenever. I think that will damage the theatrical release. I think it's true, it's not really audience driven, but I think for the benefit of having a good theatrical result, we need some protection. Right.
Let me just summarize that, and then we'll come to Radu. What you're saying is there may be a model where that works, but actually the truth is that we can't build, you don't have the confidence that we could build a model around audience demand, because you don't think audience demand that the audience will want to watch things at home when we want to watch them in the cinemas. And that seems to me the opposite of what Louise has been saying, which is if you give people the choice, they will still want to see theatrical films in theatres. And actually the argument is that the business model that comes together is one that doesn't need a window because the market will work itself out. I'm not arguing the case, I'm just saying, is that wrong?
I think it depends from what kind of movie are we talking about. For more sophisticated niche movie, probably that is true. But for larger, for film that aim to have a larger audience, I don't think that is true.
Okay, Radu, you wanted to make a point.
Yeah, no, your question is quite complex because there are more differences between countries and cultures. We know that. We have the copyright culture and we have the auto right culture, and we have like different policies by the countries. In France, you have a cultural policy who tries to make a balance between what we mean cultural movies and also the industry, how to make business in a way, but not just business, to give to the audience what I think we all defend here, what we call the independent and movies from diversity. So not just the blockbusters. So in that term, the thought, it's a bit more complex, how to still give the power to those movie of independent and diverse movie. So now what is interesting and funny here, and I remember that the French system is what we call the chronology of the media, so that we give very precise windows, first to the theaters, after to the VOD and DVD, after to pay TV, like Canal+, and just afterward now comes the platforms, and later on the free TV. But what's interesting that all over the world, we are in a way thinking in the same way, even if we have nuances. It's great to see that we had the same idea like Richard. We start to work on this idea like 2 years ago, when we saw that in France, like we have more or less 5,500 screens. In 1 year, in December, Disney occupied with 2 movies, half of the screens of the countries. So imagine what left to the other people, and to all the other directors, producers, distributors, was a tragedy. And there's no law about that. And imagine all the distributor and the producer who spend money for the marketing and they had no space in the theaters. So that was the beginning of our question, how to defend the independent and the film from the diversity. How make them to be quite equal in front of those blockbusters in terms of exhibition, and in terms of how to make them reach any audience in the country, and not just the big blockbuster who can have all the theaters in Marseille, in Paris, in Strasbourg, Lyon, etc. So then we came with an idea, which is an experiment. We don't know yet if it works or not. We didn't try it, but it's on the table of the Minister of Culture, President of the Center of the Cinematography, is what we called, it's quite similar to what Richard is doing. We call that theatrical catch-up, which means that we give first the movie to the theaters. And the theaters who screen the movie, but only those, they can put the movie, if they screen it, a minimum of numbers of seats and of screenings, good screenings by points. The screening of 8 p.m., it's not the same that the screening of 2 p.m. And once they had the number of points, only the theaters who screen the movie, they can put it in virtual on their platform, their own platform to their own audience in a kind of geolocalized field, but who can be bigger and bigger as long as they don't go on the field of another theater who also screen the movie. So in that way, you can first touch any audience on the territory. You can just screen the movie at the beginning in 2 theaters, one in Paris, one in Marseille. Once they had the points, they can screen it in virtual on all France, only with 2 copies. So in this way, you're the little distributor, the little producer with a great independent movie, you can cover the same number of audience like a blockbuster. Also what's great with that any, as Richard said, any theater can know through the data what's the taste of the people around the theater, what they want to see on virtual. So you can communicate with them. You can have a relationship, that virtual relationship, to know their taste and to tell them, look, in 2 weeks, I have the movie you like because you like those one and those one and those one. They are only positive, I think. But again, for us, first is theater, never date on date. Because as director, as film director, I can do movie, what we called long time ago for television. So now they are called platform movies. I can do that, but I know that they can be watched on a little screen. When I do movie for theaters, I do movie for large screens and for a community being together.
So you're recognizing something quite important in that, which is, I think going back to the point that Louisa and Rich was making is, in truth, as an audience member, I have a relationship with my local cinema. I trust them to curate for me. They're the people I know. My cinema now is Curzon Cinema. I have a relationship with the Curzon Cinema that I don't have with Artificial Eye. You don't look at who the distributor is necessarily. So in your model, what you're doing is essentially recognizing that one-to-one relationship, that very social relationship between cinema and audience, that ought to be at the heart of the kind of approach that you're taking, and that digital, rather than it being a business on the side, you're suggesting that digital release becomes something that my trusted relationship with cinemas, it's them. They're gonna give it to me, and I'm gonna watch it online if I do, because I've got a relationship with them.
Yeah, it's exactly that. We combine in a way to be vulgar. We say like my cinema can be in the same time the little library, but also afterward Amazon. They can be both. First, they can be the little library where people I know, where I go, they know me, they know my taste. And afterward, they can be Amazon and screen the movie all over the country if another theater doesn't screen it. So it seems to me to combine, and what we saw when we were locked down, also in France, I don't know in the other countries, especially the audience for cinemas, for theaters now, are quite old people, or let's say after 40s, the ones who doesn't see the Marvel movies. So these audience today and after the lockdown, they will be scared to go to the cinemas, in theaters. So we have to think to that, how to catch them, even if we have to catch again, even the younger people, and how to make them still exchange. Like a movie in France, they are for in between 2 and 4 weeks in theater after they disappear. So the distributors spend a lot of money with the marketing. The people could not see them in the first 2 weeks or 4 weeks. And when they want to see them because they heard speaking with the friends and because the marketing, the film disappeared. And they have in France by the law to wait 4 months to see it in video or virtual. So why to wait so long time? Let's do the movie as soon as possible. And that's good for the theater because that will be a theater money first, the same like if it was really a theatrical movie. Theater, distributor, and then the owners.
And I think there's a responsibility that you and Andrew have both raised, which is when we talk about what do audiences want, we need to know those things. I mean, the data and the knowledge and the relationships and the marketing, to me, that's where the digital change ought to be making its biggest impact, is in being far, far smarter and understanding how those audiences are thinking. And if we believe in diverse audiences and we don't believe it's just going to be a social bubble, the same demographic of cinephiles, then we need to understand how people think and behave, which seems to me at the essence of your model is both the theatrical brand, the relationship with the audience, but also the industry as a whole needs to get to know people much better than it does.
Yeah, and what's also positive, I think you give more power to the little theater. Nowadays, the little theater will never have the big movies, what we call the blockbuster. Now you give another power to the little theater saying, I'm little, but once I will have my points, I can screen all over the country.
Okay. Let me come to you, Ariane. You've been, I think yours, again, one of the things when we're talking, it's a kind of very interesting and useful contrast. So that idea of thinking global and acting local seems to me very relevant here. So just first of all, tell us about the MK2 relationship, how that works, and what's the thinking. I saw the words you used or was used about the relationship as a virtuous ecosystem, and I wondered if you had seen those terms, the virtuous ecosystem, and give us a sense of where this new organization fits within those kind of international relationships and the kind of relationships we've just been talking about.
Well, the relation that we have with MK2 in France, they are a partner in the company, but the day-to-day business, we are not working we're not working directly together. We don't have all their films. They are making some of their deals independently than with us. You know, if I can reach to some of what people have said earlier, it's very interesting, the point of view, you know, I'm sharing the point of view of almost all the panelists here about how to reach the audience and what you said, Michael, about, you know, reaching the audience and the importance of the marketing data that we are having, and we need to get. And what we've seen with the launch of our transactional VOD platform is that for the first time, the audience was reaching out to us directly. As a distributor, we don't get that relationship with the audience. Well, we do through the social media, but we don't deal with their technical problem, for example. And that was first for us, and we had to learn how to deal with that. But by doing that, we were also learning about them, about their habit, and about the fact that they were so excited to finally see our movies on VOD. But our movies were available on other platforms on VOD, on bigger platforms, on Apple. We have a smaller one in Quebec called Illico. They were all available there, but they were not available at, you know, under our umbrella, under our name. And most of them were so happy to find them as they were finding as it's like if they were discovering a new theater that was coming to them in their home, and they were very happy to find those films again, and they were feeling like they had a new access to a new theater. So that that pleased us, because it's great to see that the film that you have curated, as Louisa was telling earlier, or it is why people are following you, not necessarily as a brand. It's just that they have the same taste, and when you choose a film as a distributor, you want to reach an audience, and that audience, you're trying to reach them, and you hope that they will like the movie, and that they will like it so much that they will go to the theater to see it. So we are looking for at doing something like what Kino is doing right now very well in the US, as a transaction, as a virtual cinema here in Canada, working closely with the theaters and making sure that we can use the way, you know, we can use in a way the branding of all those theaters to reach that audience, and to reach them again and again, and more often in their home and in theaters.
Yeah, I mean, we don't like to talk a lot about brand. It's one of those words that used to be not talked about at all. But if we're talking about business models, however we describe it, you're talking about building relationships between audiences and things that they know and feel comfortable with. I mean, you've got a very distinctive logo, obviously, which makes a difference as well at MK2. I mean, it's one that you kind of recognize immediately. But is that something, at the moment, we have lots of disparate brands all around the place, but at the end of it, are we really maximizing the public-facing ones? Are we really making the most of those relationships that make me want to watch a film? And I think your experiment is saying, well, we can do more.
Oh, definitely. And I think that as a distributor, one of the challenge that we will have is to work even more closely with those theaters that have built in their community, that have built a feeling of community, and to make sure that they have the right tools to reach their audience that can be confused by all that new technology around them, and also all the films that can be available now in virtual cinema. They don't know how it works. They are confused by the different level of prices that they would see on a website. So it will be very important for us to give the tools or to build tools with hand in hand with the theaters to make sure that that the message that is being sent out there, now during the lockdown, but after, when the theater reopens, and maybe, during a second lockdown, we are all afraid of that, but it may happen that we work on a clear message that reassure the audience also to go back to the theaters and to know how to find our films when they can go physically in theater.
Gotcha. What we're going to do is take a quick point from Andrea, and then I've got a couple of questions in that we'll come to.
No, I just wanted to add that what Ariane said is very true to, I think, all of us. What we have created is a point of reference for art house audiences. And because these kind of movies are available on other platforms, but they are somehow lost, like in a supermarket shelves. So I think what is very important is that we all put together the community of moviegoers that like this kind of movie, the theaters that program them, the distributors that offer them. And I think this is kind of important to have a place where you find that kind of world. We do personalized things like presentation that are very important and have a big follow-up. I think this is very a key point.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of very fragmented brands, but we can do more to bring things together that already exist. Sorry, Louisa, you want to make a point? You're muted. Oh.
I was just going to say, I agree with Andrea. We had a film called It Wasn't Ours. It was another distributor called The Assistant, and it was on multi-platforms, and Curzon Home Cinema outbeat them all by a long way. And I think the thing that we do is if we treat it like a cinema as well. We're doing Q&As, and we're getting directors to the community. We're trying to do what we would do in our cinemas, the Q&As, but virtually. It's not the same, but it's trying to build that community online and make people feel special and welcome.
But again, all of our talk about business models is based on the idea of building communities. It's not about switching around value chains and so on. It's about understanding and having closer relationships. Richard, and I want to come to Radu on this question as well. We've got some questions just come in, but the one that really I think has come round in all of these is, have we seen any sign of a different demographic, of different tastes emerging out of this? Because if I was looking for a positive, and I have any sense that online is the strength of online is that choice, then I want to see different people choosing different kinds of films and getting that sense of adventure and new areas of choice around which we could build a business model.
The way I would respond to that is the reality with some of our very specialized films that in physical world would have played in 30 or 40 theaters and are now approaching 200 screens. the documentary on arguably the first abstract artist, a woman named Hilma af Klint, film called Beyond the Visible. Very specialized film. It's a film that was based on a very successful exhibition at the Guggenheim Museum. 600,000 people went to see that, but that's a drop in the bucket for theater goers. We were just thrilled to see the embrace of that film by theaters far and wide, many, many more than ever would have even touched it physically. The audiences connected to it. I think, what we're looking at right now is a very critical moment because the theaters are anticipating reopening physically. While the theaters were all shut down and virtual was the only option, we had kind of a free pass to try something new and to invent and to create an alternative and a supplemental source of income. Now we have a balancing act. We have to be sensitive to the issues that the theaters are facing in terms of whether they continue to embrace the digital screening opportunities to the point that it will make their theater goers couch potatoes again, or whether they can create a kind of a dual opportunity that continues to supplement their income. I call it the Goldilocks moment. We don't want the virtual and the physical to be too hot or too cold. We don't want the digital virtual to be too successful such that the theatrical experience is de-emphasized. On the other hand, we don't want to suppress it. The tradition has been in thinking about digital as a kind of a second-class citizen of theater, of cinema experiencing, which is why there's been such an uproar against what Netflix was doing. I think that can change as the theaters begin to balance the actual physical and the digital virtual. I think as they begin to expand the halo of their theatrical exhibition to encompass the digital experience and create a curation model which can activate their base and break down the silos between digital or physical, I think the theaters will eventually become more potent as cultural institutions, not just movie theaters. Cultural institutions that can help shape and develop the customer's tastes and create a more expansive opportunity for their viewers who will become more loyal to them at the same time, even as the theaters learn more about what they want and who they are.
It does feel, thank you, Richard. It does feel, Radu, that there is implied in some of this stuff, though, is that the new model that's coming is that the diverse, the challenging, the art stuff is increasingly going to be seen on the small screen. And it is a second-class experience in as much as a director makes something for a big screen. I mean, I love television, but make television for television. It is by its very definition, a film on a small screen is not what the director intended when they were doing it. But do you worry that we end up with these what I was hoping for during this period is you might de-ghettoize some of this idea that art is over, art house film over here and this kind of film over here, and that we can get out of the bubbles. I just wondered if there's any signs of a model that works.
Listen, I'm not quite worried, and I'm 100% agreed with Richard. I think that we don't have those questions for music. Music, we love to hear music home, alone, and to concentrate, and we love to go to concerts. So neither one, nobody will kill nobody. I think that, and what we discover with the lockdown, that the people who watched movies, that increased 10% in France. So the movies are not dead. People love to watch movies. We screen in television very old movies. People watch that. It makes tremendous scores. So the question is not loving cinema, loving movies, loving diversity, even if that has to still to go with a policy. We don't have to forget that, and we'll get, I know, to that question, does the state or the administration to help in a way? Yes, we have to help for the balance of the diversity, but I'm 100% agreed with Richard that any crisis was a good occasion to invent in the history of the humanity. I think we have a window now where we have to experiment. Everything will be good and bad, doesn't matter, but the good stuff will stay there. And I think that that thing to combine the theater and to say to the theater, don't be afraid anymore, you'll never die. But to not die, make another kind of modern link with your audience. Don't be afraid to be modern, to create something new with them, another kind of link. And they will come to the theater, but those who cannot come, like the elders and so many people, will maybe live now for 3 or 4 months, theaters with half of capacity, because for security reason, they will not be able to accept everybody. So that will be a big problem for everybody, for the theaters, for the distributors, for the producers to be able to produce some other movies. Why to not say, okay, bring as much people as you can in the theater, but also give them the movie in virtual, in a way. So I think it, for me as a director, of course I will direct the movie for the screen, the big screen. But I try to find some new ideas, how to reach the audience. We, all of us, do movies, even Godard, even if he says it's not, he's doing movies for the audience. He dreams about the audience, about that dialogue. So the dialogue has to be, if possible, on the big screen, but let's find some other ways.
But the dialogue's not diminished, the communication's diminished, even if it's a smaller screen. Okay, Ariane, there's a question for you, because I want to come back to Louisa on that issue as well. But Ariane, there's a question here about festivals, the relationships with festivals. And I think the festival circuit feels to me, it's one of the big, perhaps we don't speak enough about the growth and the rise of the festival circuit. But if we believe in that diversity and we believe in new approaches, I just wondered how the relationship with festivals will grow, particularly as some of them have gone online, of course.
Well, yeah, and we have a lot of them happening in the fall here in Canada. So most of them are somewhere between September and November, so in all different cities. So it's a question to see how that will work. And we used to work very tightly with festival and showing most of our films during the festival season before having a theatrical release later. So we will well, we need to talk with them and to first see when our theaters will reopen. That should be soon, and see what they will have to propose. But we are open to do some virtual festival partnership for some of the film when it will make sense. Either it will be because of the specific, festival like Fantasia, for example, that will reach a specific audience, or to a festival that will be in a city where we know that we will be able to release the film afterwards. And but it's a very good question. How we will handle all that festivals. They are big ones, smaller ones, and there are a couple of conversations going on with some of them, trying to work together for the next festival season.
Yeah, so and Richard, presumably you found them very useful partners during this period. I mean, I just wonder whether the festival is about to go through will be at the forefront of these kind of changes you have in mind.
Well, the festivals are undergoing major changes because many of them are becoming year-round institutions, and there's a kind of a porous border right now between festivals, film societies, and art houses that have calendar programs. I think there's going to be an increased interpenetration, so to speak, between festival programming and art house cinemas, and also we see festivals that are creating runs. So, everyone is learning new tricks from the challenges at hand, and festivals have been on the forefront of innovation for a long time, and that's why they've grown so significantly. The key with festivals is that they've got passionate subscribers and members, and they have demonstrated best practices in terms of activating their bases and getting their customers to want to see the films. that they're showing films which have no profile other than being shown at the festival. The audience goers trust the festivals as curators and will take a risk on otherwise anonymous and unknown films. I think more and more the theaters have to emulate that capability, and the best ones are.
Okay, we're going to have to round up. We have got to, I'm just going to quickly go around and just find out a couple of core points from each of you. So Radu, just quickly on film policy, I still see a lot of the innovation going on around distribution. You're talking about how exhibition might fit in, and sales, but I still don't quite understand. You know, most of our money, or not most, it's like 41% if you take France out of the money for European film is coming from public funds. What do we need to do in terms of public policy and public funds at the production level to actually help keep that solid and sustainable supply chain that will make your dream come true?
Yeah, but again, what you call public funds are not all of them public funds. There are sometimes what we call the fonds soutien, which is a kind of tax on the ticket. So yeah. Like one example, when Titanic, the American movie, makes 20 million people audience, we are so happy because there are 11% of the tickets go for the French and European movies. So that's great. So that's not public money.
No, I should have said Vive la France on that thing, because the French system is somewhat different than I think most European countries.
Yeah, and we are, let's remember that we are the #1 in terms of producing of the diversity. We are producing quite many of the biggest directors, women and men in the world. So we are very proud of that. We are very proud of the Cannes Film Festival, and that's also a mix of private and public money. What we have the champions, let's say, we can have a policy, French and European. We are very, very aggressive in Brussels, as you know, and we have 2 directives who will be translated in the French law, who will oblige the platforms. And I remember that during the crisis period, Netflix get 28% gross plus 28% gross during just the pandemic. So now the law will say that all the platforms, but European and American, but all of them, they will have to have minimum 30% of the catalog of European films or series or show, which means that they have to produce, to spend in France and in Europe. And they will also have an obligation of financement of European films. So that's the policy. So
we want Apple and Netflix to pay for some of our new business models.
All of them, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, but also the French, the European platforms, if they want to produce. So that's the policy. That's what we work with the public, saying, make them, oblige them, and also oblige them to be diverse. Because Netflix could say, okay, all my money, I want to put it in just one movie. That's not possible in France. And that will not be possible in France. They will have to spend for expensive movie, medium budget movies, and low budget movies. That's the law. So in that, we try to develop and to also to protect the independent producer, because as you know, some of the platforms, they want to have 100% of the rights for the lifetime. So that also will be a big discussion in France, because we want to protect the independent producers.
Okay, the fight that was already going on is still going. Louisa, is there anything from you that needs to change in terms of public policy?
Oh, don't get me started.
No, I know. We've only got a few minutes, so I was hoping you would have already know the answer.
No, I think I better keep quiet on that question. I wished we lived in France. I wished we had the help and the subsidy and the sustainability that you have in France. I think the UK it's a tough one, especially for independent, smaller, foreign language, diverse films. It really is a struggle. And I'm hoping that maybe this new model will be a way of bringing more diverse films into the country and sustaining it afterwards, because otherwise we are in trouble.
Yeah.
In the UK.
Louisa and we're gonna buy a canoe and come over to France. We become more, in Britain. We're getting more francophile every day.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Andrea, anything needs to specifically change that you think, particularly from the public side, that could support what we're doing?
Listen, we have in Italy we have copied very much the French system, and we're very happy with that. You know, there is a law that diversifies the reinvestment of the 11% that all the business produce, and I think it's very effective, and it's modelized on the independent producer and so on. So I think that's quite effective as an interesting, and I think more than simple an obligation for broadcaster and platform, I see it often to become an opportunity, because this obligation has often created successful cases of films and series that have been produced locally. And I think so that is a very virtual and interesting system.
Yeah.
You know.
Excellent. Richard, obviously a lot of yours have been about relationships with cinemas, but is there any specific thing, just one thing that you'd look at and think, if we could just do that, we could take advantage of the opportunities that have arisen during the last few months?
The most powerful lesson I've learned in this process is that we are becoming category creators here. We're establishing a new window in the market between theatrical and digital, and we're seeing the power of both theatrical and digital reinforce each other in terms of providing more opportunities for the viewer and potentially more revenue streams for the cinemas. I think the most important thing that's coming out of this is continuing innovation, continued flexibility between the theaters and the distributors, and moving away from the animosity or the antagonism between digital and theatrical. I think as theaters befriend the digital experience as an opportunity, as a source of income, as a way that they can curate the vast array of availabilities for their audiences, they can basically own a piece. It's kind of what I call VOD judo. Rather than being threatened by the incursions of digital onto their audiences, they can reverse the process and capture some of the income that otherwise is flowing into the coffers of the giant SVODs. So we've got to rethink all of our assumptions about the contention between the physical and the virtual, open the doors to more innovation and be creative category creators.
That should keep us busy for a few days. And Ariane,
I know if you figure it out.
You've got weeks yet. I mean, I'm sure a second wave will. Anyway, let's not go there. Ariane, just you've got the final word here. I mean, I think what's really exciting about your work again, we've got to remember we're an international business. You know, this is something where we're crossing borders. You know, the great virtue of cinema is it brings world-class content into local areas, and
Yes.
It creates those boundaries. Is there anything that you find frustrating or that you would like to see put in place that can allow you to achieve what you think could be achieved in the virtuous ecosystem that perhaps you represent?
Well, one of the challenges that we are facing right now is, in terms of all that technical things that we have to learn that we don't know anything about, to put that together. So we've met, I would say that one of the great things that had happened during the lockdown is that, like what we are doing right now, sharing all the information between distributors is a great help for some, sharing our strength and our knowledge is very important. And we should continue to do that if we want to make sure as independent distributors that our business model can live and continue to grow.
Excellent. So we've got that marriage, I think, between the digital economy, the experience economy, and the knowledge economy, that actually sharing ideas and our learnings could benefit us all. That's where we're going to end the panel. I think you've all been really generous again with your time, and I urge anyone who's interested to go and have a look online. You're going to find a lot of information that's coming out about each one of our participants. With more than 300 people watching this session, hopefully they got a lot out of this. What I would say is that we've talked during this period not about this period as replacing anything. It's not like this was the end of cinema, or this was some kind of end in any way. The dream we had before of a diverse, exciting European cinema and world cinema, which actually could take culture and commerce out to those, and the kind of economic and social values that we hold out to much bigger audiences, have now reached whole new areas. I think that's whole new levels. I think that's really exciting. I think that the idea that Radu puts there is that you build out from cinemas, and Louisa as well. You build out from brands with which people have relationships. Ariane put that very well as well. We can take this period with all the learnings that Richard and Andrea have learned, take everything we've got there. It feels like it's time for a huge discussion where we can actually find that flexibility with us as an industry, where we can approach things with an open mind. And perhaps the one thing I would say is we need to, that came out was we need to organize and understand our audiences much better. And I think that as we move forward into new areas, not just going back to what we were before, but trying to be even more exciting, even more diverse, even more culturally important, it feels to me like we need to be sharing our knowledge. We need to be coming together far more than we've done before. This could be the most exciting period, and thanks to the panel for sharing this period of experimentation. I think the really exciting thing, hopefully, will be in 2 years' time when we're looking back at this and wondering what the hell social distancing was, and we're looking at a new world. So thanks to the panel. Thanks to UniFrance, still one of the most important names in European and world cinema. I think this demonstrates the value of discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Grazie.